Hey, it's Matt. Welcome back to the Walstad series where I go over every chapter of Diana Walstad's book, Ecology of the Planted Aquarium. This video is all about chapter 2, and chapter 2 is all about plants acting as water purifiers for the tank. And holy moly is this chapter intimidating. This chapter is a really data-driven and dense chapter. There's a lot of information and research data that explains how plants purify aquarium water in this chapter. One of the most important concepts in this chapter is about how different fish have different tolerances for metal toxicity, and how some fish are just more resilient than others when it comes to metals, ammonia, nitrites, and other elements. She talks about how this is very important if you use well water or have tap water high in metals. The acceptable standard for metals in drinkable water is a lot different for people than it is for fish. That's why it's important to have plants in your tank. If you have high levels of metal in your water, the plants do a really good job of absorbing harmful metals in the water. It talks about how plants are really good at taking in zinc and lead, but not much about how they remove copper from the water. That's important to note because invertebrates like shrimp and snails are very sensitive to copper, and plants won't do a lot to remove copper from your water. One of the most important topics of this chapter is about ammonia. Something I found really interesting was that the higher the pH, the greater the ammonia toxicity. There's about a 10-fold increase in ammonia for every 1 increase in pH. So having a lower pH or more acidic water can be beneficial for a lot of fish, but obviously that depends on the type of fish you have. Fish that prefer a higher pH should be kept at a higher pH, but if you can reduce that pH a little bit, it'll help with any ammonia spikes. It also talks about how efficient plants are at uptaking ammonia and how they prefer ammonia over nitrates. In a study she talks about the plants, they always uptake ammonia before they start to take up nitrates. Something to keep in mind is that nitrates differ from nitrites. So if you want to look more into that, you can look into how the nitrogen cycle works. And understanding the nitrogen cycle will really help you establish a healthy tank. This chapter also talks about how nitrates affect fish. She goes over how nitrates bind to the hemoglobin in a fish's blood. That causes fish to have trouble getting enough oxygen. So if you have fish that keep gasping for air, there's probably more of a nitrite issue than an ammonia issue. The last and probably one of the most important aspects of this chapter is how water flow affects plant nutrient uptake. She talks about a study that showed a drastic increase in ammonium uptake by duckweed once there was some water flow. This kind of shows how important it can be to have just a little bit of flow in your tank and how flow can be really beneficial to your plants. So that's all of chapter 2. Like I said, this is a really dense chapter, so I didn't cover a lot of the data points she talked about just because it was a little mundane. But if you're interested in any of that, I suggest getting the book. This chapter is a really good chapter if you're into biology and chemistry, but it's probably not as important if you're just starting out in the hobby. I think every chapter from now on would be very important to beginners and anyone looking to up their Walstad method tank. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one. Keep escaping. So if you have fish that keep grasping for air, they don't got hands.